The Crown and Anchor smelled like bourbon and desperation every 20-something in Manhattan, who believed 3 good pitches stood between them and mattering. Daniel Brennan nursed his second whiskey at the bar's corner, letting Kieran Sullivan's voice wash over him without quite listening. Something about a disastrous client meeting a creative director with an ego problem, the usual carnage of their industry. Daniel's mind was elsewhere. 3 rejections in 1 month. 3 campaign concepts he'd spent late nights perfecting, only to watch Elena Ashford glance at them for maybe 30 seconds before delivering verdicts that felt like controlled explosions. The last one still burned Lack's vision, 4 words that somehow contained entire dissertations on his inadequacy. Kieran flagged the bartender for another round. The man looked exactly like what he was, an Ohio transplant who'd been in New York long enough to fake belonging but not long enough to stop flinching at the prices. His rust-colored hair had that perpetually disheveled quality that came from running hands through it during stress, which meant it looked disheveled roughly 18 hours a day. "You listening to me, Brennan?" Daniel forced his attention back. "David Hartford's an ass. I got it." "No, you didn't get it. The man made Jenny cry over a font choice. A font, not even a bad font, Helvetica, for Christ's sake. The man has issues." "Everyone in this industry has issues." Daniel took a long drink, the burn familiar and almost comforting. 3 years in New York. 3 years of barely scraping rent on a salary that would have been decent anywhere else, but here meant choosing between groceries and subway fare. 3 years of sharing a cramped Brooklyn apartment with Kieran because neither of them could afford the astronomical cost of solitude. "Yeah, but at least our issues don't involve making people weep over typography." Kieran paused, studying him. "You're brooding about Ashford again." "I don't brood. You absolutely brood. You get this look like someone kicked your hypothetical dog." Daniel smiled despite himself. "Metaphorically kicked my metaphorical dog." "There he is." Kieran clinked his glass against Daniel's. "Look, the woman is brilliant, I'll give her that. Building a company from nothing, buying out her sexist partner, making it to the top before 40. Impressive as hell. But she's terrifying." Daniel couldn't argue. Elena Ashford existed in the office like a force of nature, something you prepared for, respected from a distance, and hoped wouldn't notice you. Tall, with features that looked carved rather than formed, dark hair always pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into permanent severity. She wore power suits like armor, moved through hallways with the kind of certainty that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled people. The color of winter skies before snow, they could dissect a presentation, find every weakness, every assumption, every lazy shortcut. 3 people had quit in the last month rather than endure another one of her reviews. Jenny from accounting had indeed cried last week, though whether it was the font choice or the accumulated weight of Elena's exacting standards remained unclear. "She's not that bad." Daniel heard himself say the words, sounding hollow even to him. Kieran snorted. "Beautiful, sure, like a glacier's beautiful right before it crushes your ship." Henderson from creative literally shook during a pitch. The man's 45 and has 20 years in the business. The thing was, Daniel understood it. Not the cruelty, if it was even cruelty, but the drive behind it. He'd researched her once late at night when sleep wouldn't come and the internet beckoned. The articles painted a picture: Boston working class roots. Mother, a literature professor who died too young. Father, a public defender who remarried and moved away, scholarship to Yale. Graduated top of her class, joined Sterling and Rowe as an intern, worked every position on the way up, absorbed everything, learned everything. Then 5 years ago, when her male partner tried to claim credit for her client acquisition strategy, she'd bought him out. Not with family money or venture capital, but with her own earnings leveraged to the breaking point. She'd renamed the company Ashford and Associates, no mention of Sterling, no concession to the past. Just her name standing alone. That took something beyond ambition. That took the kind of controlled fury that could only come from years of being underestimated, dismissed, doubted. Daniel recognized it because he'd felt echoes of it himself. Every time a pitch was rejected not because it was bad, but because he was junior, unproven, easy to overlook. Every time someone older, wider, better connected took credit for collaborative work. The difference was that Elena had transformed her fury into an empire. Daniel was still trying to transform his into a career. He was about to signal for the check when the bar's energy shifted. It was subtle, the way conversations dipped in volume, the way heads turned toward the entrance. Daniel glanced up and felt something cold slide down his spine. Elena Ashford stood just inside the door, and everything about her was wrong. Her hair had come loose from its usual severe bun, dark strands falling around her face in a way that would have been beautiful if it didn't look so chaotic. Her blazer, always perfectly tailored, always immaculate, hung askew, buttons mismatched with holes. A smudge of mascara darkened the skin beneath one eye, but it was her expression that truly jarred. Those winter sky eyes that could reduce grown professionals to stammering interns now held something Daniel had never seen in them. Pure, undiluted terror. She scanned the crowded bar like a drowning person searching for anything to grab onto. Her hands trembled visibly. Her breathing came in short, controlled bursts, the kind people took when trying to stave off a panic attack. This wasn't the Elena Ashford who fired 3 people last month without blinking. This was someone barely holding themselves together. Kieran had gone silent beside him, following his gaze. "Is that—" "Yeah." Elena's eyes locked onto Daniel's across the sea of Friday night revelers, and she moved. Not walked, moved with the desperate purpose of someone fleeing something terrible. People parted instinctively, sensing something feral in her approach, something that overrode the usual social contract of a Manhattan bar. She reached their corner in seconds that felt like hours. Up close, the destruction of her carefully maintained facade was even more apparent. A button had torn from her blazer. Her lipstick was smudged at one corner. The woman who existed as a paragon of control had clearly lost all of it, and the sight sent Daniel's heart hammering against his ribs. Elena didn't grab his wrist, didn't demand or threaten. Instead, she placed her hand on his, a light touch, barely there, but he felt it trembling. Her voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help. Just please pretend you know me." The words cracked halfway through. This close, Daniel could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral he'd caught hints of in elevators and conference rooms. But never this immediate, never this real. Her pupils were dilated with fear. A fine sheen of sweat dotted her hairline despite the November cold outside. "I can't be alone right now. Please just stand with me. Make it look like we're together. I'll explain everything, I promise, please." Daniel's brain short-circuited. Every alarm bell from 3 years of professional survival screamed warnings. This was his CEO. This was a woman who could destroy his career with a word. This was inappropriate on so many levels he couldn't even count them all. But he looked into her eyes, those eyes that had terrified him for 3 years, and saw something that made all the warnings evaporate. She was absolutely, genuinely afraid. Kieran made a strangled sound beside him, but Daniel was already standing. He wrapped an arm around Elena's shoulders, feeling her body press against his with desperate relief. She fit against him, naturally tall enough, even in heels, that her head reached his shoulder. Her whole frame trembled. "It's okay." Daniel heard himself say the words inadequate, but all he had. "I've got you. Just breathe." Elena's fingers clutched the fabric of his shirt, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. Her breath was warm against his chest, coming in those same controlled bursts. Up this close, he could feel her fighting for composure, muscle by muscle. She whispered against his shoulder, "Don't look behind me. Don't make eye contact. Just walk me to the door, slowly, like we're leaving together, like this is normal." Daniel's feet moved on autopilot. The crowd parted around them, some people staring, others too absorbed in their own Friday night dramas to notice. He was hyper-aware of every point of contact, her hand. gripping his shirt, her shoulder beneath his arm, the tremor that ran through her entire body. They were halfway to the exit when Daniel caught it, a man watching from across the bar, positioned near the back wall where the lighting was dimmer. Tall blonde, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, handsome in that sharp, calculated way that usually came with trust funds and prep school credentials. But it was his expression that made Daniel's skin crawl, a smile that was all teeth and cruelty satisfaction dripping from every perfectly symmetrical feature. A woman draped over his arm couldn't have been older than 23. Stunning in that way that required professional maintenance, perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect dress. She laughed at something the man whispered in her ear, completely oblivious to the predatory way he watched Elena's retreat. Elena's grip on Daniel tightened painfully. "Don't look at him. Don't give him the satisfaction." But Daniel was already assembling pieces, the terror in Elena's eyes, the way she'd materialized in this specific bar at this specific time. The man watching them with that knowing, victorious smile. This wasn't about work. This wasn't about company politics or professional boundaries. This was deeply, dangerously personal. The cold Manhattan air hit them like a slap. Elena immediately stepped away from Daniel, creating distance between them, her arms wrapping around herself in a posture of protection. They stood on the sidewalk while Friday night chaos swirled around them, taxis honking, people laughing, the city humming with its usual indifferent symphony. For a long moment, neither spoke. Elena's chest rose and fell with deep breaths, her eyes closed. Her professional composure trying desperately to reassemble itself. Daniel watched the transformation attempt, saw her straighten her spine, adjust her blazer with shaking fingers, smooth back the loose strands of hair. The CEO was trying to emerge from whatever hell she'd just escaped. When she finally spoke, her voice had regained some of its usual edge, though it trembled at the corners. Don't say anything, don't." The control cracked. "Just don't." Daniel shoved his hands in his pockets, uncertain. Every instinct screamed to ask if she was okay, to offer help, to do something. But this was still Elena Ashford, still his CEO, still the woman who could end his career with a single word to HR. She tried again, forcing the words out like they were being torn from her throat. "I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. Unprofessional. I put you in an uncomfortable position without your consent, and I shouldn't have." She laughed, a brittle sound that had nothing to do with humor. "I shouldn't have threatened your job. That was unconscionable." Except she hadn't threatened his job, not once. But Daniel stayed quiet, watching her try to rewrite what had just happened into something she could control, something that fit the narrative she needed it to be. Who was he? The question came out quieter than Daniel intended. Elena's eyes snapped to his fierce with warning. "No one. Nothing. It doesn't matter." "It clearly matters. It doesn't." She straightened to her full height, and for a moment Daniel saw the boardroom version again, imperious, untouchable. "This conversation never happened. You were never here. We never—" She gestured vaguely between them, encompassing the moment, the fear, the desperate grab for safety. "This doesn't exist." Daniel should have agreed, should have nodded and gone back inside, returned to Kieran and his bourbon and his simple Friday night. Instead, he said, "He looked like he was trying to hurt you." Elena's composure cracked again, just for a second. A flash of pain so raw it made Daniel's chest ache. "He already did," she whispered. Then louder, forceful, "Go back inside, Mr. Brennan. Forget this happened. On Monday everything will be normal. We'll be professional. This—" She waved her hand, encompassing the sidewalk, the moment, the terrifying vulnerability she'd shown. "This was an aberration. It won't happen again." She turned to walk away, her heels clicking against concrete with that familiar authoritative rhythm. "Miss Ashford." She stopped but didn't turn around. "Are you going to be okay?" Her shoulders tensed. For a moment Daniel thought she might ignore him entirely. Then so quietly he almost missed it. "I don't know." And she was gone, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians, swallowed by the city that had made her and might now break her. Daniel stood alone on the sidewalk for a long time after she left, trying to reconcile the woman he'd just held, trembling, desperate, thoroughly human, with the legend he'd worked for. Trying to make sense of a world where Elena Ashford could be afraid. When he finally went back inside, Kieran was waiting with wide eyes and a fresh bourbon that Daniel definitely needed. What the hell was that? Daniel took the drink and downed half of it in one burning swallow. I have no idea. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Monday morning when he walked into Ashford and Associates, everything would be different. Not because Elena had said so, because he'd seen behind the facade. He'd felt her fear, her desperation, her humanity. And you couldn't unsee something like that. You couldn't unknow the trembling fingers of a woman the world thought was made of ice. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. Daniel tried to work on his portfolio, tried to enjoy Saturday brunch with Kieran, tried to do anything that might distract him from replaying those few minutes on the sidewalk. But Elena's voice kept echoing in his head, the desperation underneath the words, the way she'd clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become quicksand. Kieran, to his credit, didn't press for details. He'd seen enough to know that whatever had happened was bigger than office gossip, stranger than their usual Friday night adventures. But by Sunday evening, watching Daniel pace their small living room for the 15th time, he'd clearly had enough. You're being weird. I'm not being weird. You've reorganized the bookshelf 3 times. You alphabetized our cereal. You're definitely being weird. Daniel stopped pacing. If you saw someone you respected in trouble, I mean really in trouble, would you just forget about it because they told you to? Kieran considered this, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Depends. Is this someone actually asking for help, or are they asking to be left alone? I don't know. Both, maybe. Then you respect their wishes and stay ready in case they change their mind. Kieran stood up, clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Look, I don't know what happened with Ashford on Friday, but that woman didn't become a CEO by being helpless. If she needs help, she'll ask. Your job is to not make it weird at work. Sound advice. Daniel repeated it to himself like a mantra. As he rode the subway Monday morning, as he walked through the gleaming glass doors of Ashford and Associates, as he settled at his desk in the creative department's open plan office. Don't make it weird. Act normal. She said it never happened, so it never happened. He made it until 10:30 before his phone buzzed with a message that made his heart stop. My office. Now. EA. The creative department went silent. Everyone knew that tone, that summons. You didn't get called to Elena Ashford's office for good news. Nice knowing you, someone whispered as Daniel stood up. His legs felt like water as he crossed the floor toward the executive wing. The elevator ride to the top floor took forever and no time at all. The CEO's suite was all glass and steel and intimidation, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan modern art. That probably cost more than Daniel's student loans. And a receptionist who looked at him like he was tracking mud on pristine white carpet. She's expecting you. The words dripped with the kind of pity usually reserved for condemned prisoners. Daniel knocked once on the heavy door. Come in. Elena sat behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of black marble. She was perfect again, hair in its severe bun, makeup flawless, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed power and money. Everything about her posture said CEO. Nothing about her suggested she'd ever been afraid of anything in her life. Except her eyes. For just a second when she looked up at him, Daniel saw it, a flash of the same fear, the same vulnerability. Then it was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. Close the door, Mr. Brennan. Daniel obeyed, his heart hammering. Sit, he sat. Elena folded her hands on her desk, a gesture Daniel had seen her use in meetings when she was about to destroy someone's entire proposal. He braced himself. I owe you an apology. Of all the things Daniel had expected, that wasn't one of them. Miss Ashford, you don't... I do. Her voice was firm, controlled. What I did on Friday was completely inappropriate. I used my position of authority to put you in an uncomfortable situation without your consent. Those actions go against everything this company stands for, and I'm deeply ashamed of them." She pulled a document from her desk drawer, slid it across the marble surface toward him. "This is a formal apology along with assurances that there will be no retaliation of any kind for Friday's incident. I have also included a recommendation for a transfer to any department you choose with a significant raise, should you feel uncomfortable continuing to work under my leadership." Daniel stared at the document without touching it. "I don't want a transfer." Elena blinked clearly, not expecting that response. "Mr. Brennan, and you don't owe me an apology, not for that anyway." Elena's carefully maintained composure shifted slightly. "I threatened your—" "You didn't threaten anything. You were scared. Someone was threatening you or intimidating you, or I don't know exactly what was happening, but you weren't trying to abuse your power. You were trying to survive something." Silence filled the office. Outside the windows, the city sprawled, endlessly indifferent to human drama. "That's generous of you," Elena said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "But it doesn't excuse—" "Who was he?" Elena's composure cracked. Just for a second, pain flashed across her features, raw and deep and clearly unhealed. "That's not relevant to—" "It's completely relevant." Daniel leaned forward. "Look, I get it. You're the CEO. You're supposed to be invincible. But what I saw on Friday, that wasn't a power trip. That was someone in genuine distress, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You can't help with this, Mr. Brennan. This isn't a campaign that needs a creative solution. This is my personal life, which I've worked very hard to keep separate from this company." "Then why am I here?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena stood up, walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass looked small somehow, despite her height, despite the power suit and the corner office and the title that made grown men nervous. "His name is Preston Sterling." The words came out quiet, like an admission of defeat. "We were engaged. 3 years. He proposed on a yacht in Greece, gave me a ring that cost more than most people's cars. Everyone said we were perfect together. The power couple. Industry royalty." She pressed her palm against the glass. "6 months ago, I found out he'd been cheating on me. Not just once, multiple affairs, some lasting months. One of them was with my former assistant, a girl I'd mentored, promoted, trusted." Her voice hollowed out. "When I confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He said I was too focused on my career, that I was cold, that he needed someone who could make him feel wanted." Daniel felt anger coiling in his chest. "That's textbook narcissist behavior." Elena turned from the window. "That's what my therapist calls it. Blame the victim for your own failings." She walked back to her desk but didn't sit. "I ended it, threw the ring at him, literally, very dramatic, very unlike me. And I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. No." Her hands clenched into fists. "He's been showing up at events I attend, at restaurants where I have reservations, always with a different woman, always younger, always making sure I see them, making sure I know he's moved on, that he's happy, that leaving me was the best thing that ever happened to him." "That's harassment," Daniel said flatly. "That's New York," Elena corrected. "We run in the same circles, attend the same galas. Our companies work with the same clients. I can't prove he's doing it deliberately, and even if I could, what would I do? Take out a restraining order? The headlines would destroy me. Bitter CEO can't handle X moving on. Elena Ashford loses control." She sat down heavily and for a moment looked utterly exhausted. "I've worked 20 years to build this company, to earn respect in an industry that still thinks women belong in creative, not leadership. I can't let him take that from me. I can't let anyone see me as—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Weak." Daniel understood then. The facade wasn't just for show. It was survival. In a world that would tear her apart for showing emotion, Elena Ashford had learned to become untouchable. And Preston Sterling had found the one crack in that armor. He'd made her feel humiliated, vulnerable, afraid. And now he was exploiting it. "So on Friday," Daniel said slowly, "when you saw him at the bar, I panicked. Completely, thoroughly panicked. I couldn't face him alone again. Couldn't stand there while he paraded his latest conquest like... She stopped, took a breath. You were there. You're forgive me, Junior, enough that people wouldn't question it. I thought I could use you as a shield just for a moment, just to get out of there without giving him the satisfaction of seeing me run. Daniel's lips quirked despite the seriousness of the conversation. Junior enough? That's actually pretty accurate. Elena's expression softened slightly, the ghost of a smile. I am sorry for all of it. The manipulation dragging you into my mess. Apology accepted, but I still want to help. There's nothing... Actually, Daniel interrupted. There might be. Elena raised an eyebrow, the expression that usually preceded someone getting eviscerated in a meeting. But there was curiosity there too. Daniel took a breath, committing to the insane idea forming in his head. How many of these events do you have coming up? The kind where Preston might show up? Too many. There's a client dinner Thursday, a charity gala next week, industry awards in 2 weeks. Why? Because you were right about using me as a shield, except you went about it wrong. Daniel leaned forward. You asked out of desperation, which made it feel coercive. But what if, and hear me out, what if you asked instead of demanded? Elena stared at him. Asked you to what exactly? To be your date, your fake boyfriend, your very public, very visible relationship that shows Preston Sterling exactly how little you care about him anymore. The words sounded insane out loud. Daniel waited for Elena to laugh, to dismiss him, to have security escort him out. Instead, she went very still. You're serious? Completely. Think about it. You show up to these events with someone on your arm. Someone who's clearly into you, someone who makes you smile. It takes away Preston's power. He can't humiliate you if you look happy. He can't win if you've already moved on. Mr. Brennan, that's... Daniel, if we're going to fake date, you should probably call me Daniel. Elena shook her head, but Daniel saw her brilliant mind working behind those winter sky eyes, analyzing every angle, every risk, every potential disaster. This is a terrible idea. The complications alone, HR would have a field day, and if anyone found out it was fake, who would know we work together? We have plausible proximity. I'm young enough that people would think you're having a midlife crisis, but old enough that it's not creepy. And Daniel paused, making sure she understood this part. I volunteer. No threats, no coercion. Just one person helping another get through a difficult situation. Elena studied him for a long moment. Daniel could practically see her analyzing every angle, every risk, every way this could explode in both their faces. Why would you do this? She asked finally. You barely know me, and what you do know is that I'm terrifying. Daniel considered his answer carefully. Friday night, I saw something most people never see. I saw you as human, fallible, afraid, and He searched for the right words. I spent 3 years being intimidated by you. By your success, your brilliance, your absolute certainty, but now I know the truth. You're not invincible, you're just incredibly good at pretending to be, and that's actually more impressive. Elena's eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, and the moment passed. The client dinner is Thursday, she said, her voice steady again. 7 p.m., the Ashford room. I'd need you in a proper suit, which I'll provide. You'd need to know basic information about me, background, preferences, how we supposedly met. We'd need our story straight. Daniel's heart leapt. So you're saying... I'm saying I'll consider it, on several conditions. Elena held up a finger. 1, this arrangement is strictly professional and temporary. It ends when the Preston situation resolves itself. 2, absolute discretion. No one can know this is fake. Not your roommate, not your friends, not anyone. 3, you can back out at any time, no questions asked, no repercussions. And 4, she fixed him with that penetrating gaze. You tell me right now if you have any ulterior motives, because if this is some elaborate scheme to sleep with your CEO or leverage this for advancement, I will destroy you so thoroughly you'll never work in this industry again. Daniel met her eyes without flinching. No ulterior motives, no agenda. Just call it human decency. Human decency, Elena repeated as if testing the words. Then, surprising them both, she smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. That's refreshingly naive, Mr. Brennan. Daniel. Daniel. She extended her hand across the desk. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Professional, convincing, no half measures. Daniel took her hand. Her grip was firm, cool, steady. Deal. And just like that, Daniel Brennan Jr., creative, perpetually overlooked, professionally invisible, became the fake boyfriend of the most powerful woman in advertising. He had no idea what he'd just signed up for. But looking at Elena's face, seeing the relief softening the sharp edges, the gratitude she was trying so hard to hide, Daniel thought maybe, just maybe, this insane plan might actually work. Or it would explode spectacularly and take his entire career down with it. Either way, it would certainly be interesting. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of cold that made Manhattan feel like it was punishing its inhabitants for daring to live there. Daniel stood outside Ashford and Associates at 5:50 a.m., clutching a coffee that was already losing its warmth to the wind, watching his breath crystallize in the air. The building looked different at this hour, less like a temple of commerce, and more like a sleeping giant, all dark windows and silent promise. The lobby security guard gave him a curious look as he signed in. 6 a.m. meetings weren't unheard of in advertising, but they usually involved creative emergencies or client disasters, not junior employees being summoned to the CEO's office. The elevator ride felt longer in the pre-dawn quiet. Daniel's reflection in the polished doors looked uncertain, nervous. He tried to arrange his features into something more confident and failed miserably. Elena's receptionist desk was empty, of course. The whole executive floor was dark except for one office at the end of the hall, light spilling from beneath the door like a beacon. Daniel knocked softly. "Come in." Elena sat at her desk, surrounded by papers, her laptop open, 2 coffee cups already empty beside her. She'd clearly been here for hours. Her hair was still in its severe bun, but she'd forgone the blazer, just a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored black pants. Without the full armor of her suit, she looked younger, more approachable. "You're early." She didn't look up from whatever she was reading. "You said 6. It's 5:58. Early is on time is late." She finally glanced at him, and something like approval flickered across her face. "Coffee?" "Already have some. You'll need more. We have a lot to cover." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit and close the door." Daniel obeyed, settling into the same chair where she'd apologized to him just yesterday. The office felt different at this hour, more intimate somehow, without the city noise and the bright daylight to dilute the space between them. Elena slid a leather portfolio across the desk toward him. "Everything you need to know about me. Educational background, career history, family information, preferences, habits. Study it. Memorize it. If we're going to convince people we're in a relationship, you need to know me better than my own mother does." Daniel opened the portfolio. Inside were neatly organized tabs: biography, career, family, preferences, social circles. Each section typed in perfect detail, like she'd created a dossier on herself. "This is incredibly thorough. I don't do anything halfway." Elena stood, walked to her window. The sky was starting to lighten, Manhattan slowly waking beneath them. "The client dinner is in 2 days. That's not much time to build a believable relationship." "What's our story? How did we meet?" Elena turned, and Daniel saw that she'd already thought this through. Of course she had. "We keep it close to the truth. You're a creative at my company. We've worked together for 3 years, but never interacted much beyond professional capacity. 6 weeks ago, you stayed late working on a campaign pitch. I was also working late, as I often do. We ended up in the break room at the same time, 2 in the morning, both exhausted. We started talking, really talking, not just the surface-level office conversation." She delivered this like she was presenting a campaign strategy, all business. But Daniel noticed her fingers twisting together, a small tell of nervousness. "You said something that made me laugh. Actually laugh for the first time in months. And I saw you differently." Daniel couldn't help smiling. "What did I say to make you laugh?" Elena paused. "Something self-deprecating but perceptive. You have a tendency toward that in your presentations. It's endearing in small doses, though you overuse it. She said this almost absently, then seemed to catch herself. We'll say you made a joke about how the coffee machine was the only thing in the building older than me. Inappropriate, which is why I noticed. Most people are too afraid to joke with me. That does sound like something I'd say after too much caffeine and not enough sleep. After that night, we started finding excuses to cross paths. Coffee runs, late nights working. Eventually, I asked you to dinner, somewhere quiet outside Manhattan. We wanted privacy while we figured out what this was. Elena returned to her desk, sat down with perfect posture. We've been seeing each other for about a month now, keeping it secret because of the obvious complications. I'm your CEO. There's a 12-year age gap. HR policies are murky on workplace relationships between executives and non-executives. How much of an age gap are we talking? I'm 39, you're 27, 12 years, not scandalous, but enough to raise eyebrows. She met his gaze directly. Does that bother you? Should it? Some people will assume I'm having a midlife crisis, that I'm using you, that you're using me for career advancement. We need to be prepared for those assumptions. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. In the growing morning light, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight shadows beneath them that makeup usually hid. She looked tired, not just from being awake since probably 4 a.m., but bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from holding yourself together too tightly for too long. What do you need from me? He asked. At this dinner, what's the role I'm playing? Elena's expression softened slightly. Attentive but not obsequious. Confident enough to be with me, but humble enough that it's believable. You should touch me occasionally, my hand, my shoulder, small gestures that suggest intimacy. Make eye contact when I'm speaking. And if Preston is there? Her voice caught. She cleared her throat. If Preston is there, you stay close. You don't react to him. You treat him like a stranger because to you he should be. Can you do that? Yes. You answered very quickly. Because it's an easy answer. Daniel held her gaze. I'm good at reading people. It's what makes me decent at advertising. And right now I'm reading that you need someone who won't ask too many questions and won't make this harder than it needs to be. So that's what I'll be. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then almost imperceptibly her shoulders relaxed. Thank you, she said quietly. They spent the next 2 hours going through the portfolio. Daniel learned that Elena grew up in Boston, daughter of a literature professor and a public defender. That she went to Yale on scholarship, graduated top of her class. That she started at Sterling and Rowe as an intern and worked her way up through sheer brilliance and relentless drive. That she bought out her partner 5 years ago after he tried to claim credit for her ideas one too many teas. That she took her coffee black with one sugar-hated seafood, loved old movies from the 40s. He learned that she had no siblings, that her mother died when she was 25, that her father remarried and moved to Arizona, that she spoke fluent French and passable Italian, that she'd been engaged once before Preston, a brief thing in her 20s that ended amicably, that she owned a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights and a cabin in the Catskills she never had time to visit. Favorite book? Daniel asked, scanning the preferences section. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Movie Double Indemnity, the original, not the remake. Music jazz. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Billie Holiday. I find most modern music exhausting. She poured herself another coffee. Your turn. My turn. If I know everything about you but you don't know anything about me, the asymmetry will show. Elena pulled out a fresh legal pad. Talk. I'll take notes. So Daniel talked about growing up in Toledo, Ohio, middle-class suburbs and high school football games he never attended because he was in the art room, about his parents still married, still living in the same house, still baffled by his decision to move to New York, about his degree in communications from a state school nobody in Manhattan had heard of, about 3 years of struggle and rejection and slow, painful progress in an industry that chewed up people like him and spit them out. Elena wrote everything down in neat handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. What was his mother's name? Susan. His father's occupation accountant for an auto parts manufacturer. Siblings, one sister, Emily, married with twin daughters. Hobbies? Elena asked. Photography, though I haven't picked up my camera in months. Reading mostly thriller novels, cooking when I have time, which is never. Favorite food? My mom's lasagna. But in New York, there's this Thai place in Queens that makes curry that's basically perfect. Alcohol of choice? Bourbon. Nothing fancy, just whatever's on the middle shelf. Last relationship? Daniel hesitated. Ended 8 months ago. Her name was Claire. She was a graphic designer. We were together for 2 years. It ended because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because she wanted someone who was already successful, not someone who might be successful someday. She got tired of waiting for my career to happen. Elena stopped writing, looked up at him. Something in her expression shifted, recognition maybe, or sympathy. That must have been difficult. It was honest. I can respect that, even if it hurt. Daniel smiled wryly. At least she didn't cheat on me with someone younger and then parade them around to make me feel inadequate. Elena flinched slightly. Fair point. The morning sun was fully up now, flooding the office with light. Outside Manhattan was in full swing, cars, honking, people rushing the city's endless, hungry energy. But in Elena's office, time felt suspended, like they existed in a bubble where normal rules didn't apply. We should address the physical aspect, Elena said, and Daniel's brain momentarily short-circuited. The what? Physical intimacy. Hand-holding, touching, proximity. If we're supposed to be a couple, we need to be comfortable with casual contact. Right now, you look terrified every time I come within 3 feet of you. I'm not terrified. Elena raised an eyebrow. Okay, maybe mildly terrified, Daniel admitted. You're my CEO. 3 days ago, you were this untouchable figure who could fire me with a word. Now I'm supposed to hold your hand at dinner. It's a mental adjustment. Stand up! What? Stand up! We're going to practice. Daniel stood, feeling ridiculous. Elena walked around her desk and stood in front of him. Even in flats she'd kicked off her heels hours ago, she was nearly his height. Give me your hand. Slowly, Daniel extended his hand. Elena took it, her fingers cool and steady against his palm. Her grip was firm but not aggressive, natural but deliberate. See, just hands. Nothing terrifying. Her voice was gentle, almost amused. Now when we're at dinner, you might do this. She shifted her grip, lacing her fingers through his. More intimate, suggesting familiarity. Or this. She released his hand, placed her palm on his forearm instead, guiding, protective. You'd use this when we're walking together. Daniel's skin burned where she touched him, but not from fear. From awareness. From the sudden, uncomfortable realization that Elena Ashford wasn't just his CEO or a legend. She was a woman, a beautiful, intelligent, complicated woman who smelled like expensive perfume and coffee. Whose hand fit perfectly in his, whose eyes were the exact color of storm clouds. You're still tense. You're my boss. I'm aware, but at dinner I won't be. I'll just be Elena, a woman you care about, a woman you want to protect. She stepped closer and Daniel's breath caught. Can you do that? Can you look at me and see someone other than the CEO? Daniel forced himself to meet her eyes. Really look at her. Not the power suit or the perfect hair or the reputation, but the person underneath. The woman who'd been betrayed and humiliated, who was terrified of seeming weak, who'd built walls so high she'd forgotten how to let anyone in. Yeah, he said softly. I can do that. Something flickered in Elena's expression, surprise maybe, or relief. She held his gaze for a long moment, then stepped back, the professional distance sliding back into place. Good. Practice that before Thursday. She returned to her desk, all business again. I've arranged for you to get fitted for a suit this afternoon. 4 p.m. Bergdorf's. Everything's already paid for, don't argue. I wasn't going to. You were thinking about it. I can see it on your face. You're very expressive, Daniel. It's charming, but it also makes you a terrible liar. Work on that. Daniel laughed, despite himself. Any other critiques? Several, but we're out of time. I have a 9 o'clock meeting and you should actually do some work today so people don't get suspicious about why you were here at 6 in the morning. She walked him to the door. Between now and Thursday, we don't interact more than usual. No sudden lunch meetings, no extended conversations in hallways. We maintain the pretense that nothing has changed. Until Thursday. Until Thursday. Elena paused. Daniel. Yeah. If at any point this becomes too much, if you want out, you just have to say so. No judgment, no consequences. I mean that. Daniel studied her face, saw the sincerity there, the fear that he'd realize what he'd signed up for and run. I'm not going anywhere. Elena nodded once, then closed the door between them. Daniel made it back to his desk in a daze. Kieran wasn't in yet, no one was. So he sat in the quiet creative department and tried to process what had just happened. He'd spent 2 hours learning everything about Elena Ashford. He'd held her hand. He'd looked into her eyes and seen past the legend to the lonely, hurt woman underneath. And in 2 days he was going to walk into a room full of advertising executives and pretend to be in love with her. His phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Don't forget Bergdorf's, 4 p.m. Wear the navy suit they pick out. Burn whatever you were planning to wear. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. Wednesday afternoon at Bergdorf Goodman. A tailor with an Italian accent and infinite patience treated Daniel like a mannequin while assembling a suit that cost more than 3 months of his rent. Midnight navy, perfectly tailored with a crisp white shirt and a tie that Elena had apparently selected herself. When Daniel looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. He looked successful, confident, like someone who belonged on Elena Ashford's arm. Wednesday evening, his phone buzzed. My place, 6 p.m. tomorrow. We need to practice being comfortable around each other. Bring wine if you want, but I have plenty. E. Daniel stared at the address in Brooklyn Heights. The brownstone. Her actual home. This was getting real. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. Daniel left work at 5:30, rode the subway to Brooklyn, and found himself standing outside a pristine brownstone that screamed either old money or new success. Knowing Elena, it was the latter. He climbed the steps, rang the bell, and tried not to think about how monumentally this could go wrong. The woman who opened the door bore little resemblance to the CEO he knew. Elena's hair fell loose around her shoulders in waves that caught the light from inside. She wore jeans, actual jeans, and a soft gray sweater that looked like cashmere but also like comfort. No makeup except a touch around her eyes. Bare feet on hardwood floors. She looked younger, softer, completely devastatingly beautiful in a way that made Daniel forget how to breathe. You brought wine. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. You didn't have to. I didn't know what else to bring. Flowers seemed too much. Nothing seemed rude. Wine is perfect. Come in. The interior of Elena's brownstone shattered every expectation Daniel had built. He'd imagined something austere and modern, all sharp edges and minimalism. Instead, warmth surrounded him. Hardwood floors covered with vintage rugs that looked collected rather than purchased. Built-in bookshelves stuffed with novels and biographies, their spines cracked from actual reading. Art on the walls that appeared chosen for love, not value. A fireplace with photos on the mantel, Elena and her mother both laughing. Elena at Yale graduation, fierce and proud. The kitchen was all butcher block counters and copper pots and windows looking out onto a small garden. Something smelled incredible, garlic herbs, wine reducing in a pan. You're actually cooking. Elena glanced back from the stove. I said I would. Did you think I was lying? I thought you'd have it catered and pretend. I'm many things, Daniel, but I'm not a liar about food. She handed him a glass of wine, not the bottle he'd brought, but something older and probably more expensive from her collection. Cooking is one of the few things I do that has nothing to do with work or success or maintaining an image. It's just for me. She gestured to a stool at the kitchen island. Sit. Talk to me. Tell me something I don't know about you. Daniel sat watching her move around the kitchen with the same confidence she had in boardrooms. She stirred something on the stove, checked the oven, chopped fresh basil with quick, precise movements. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. We know the facts about each other, but facts aren't intimacy. I need to know how you think, how you process things, what makes you laugh when no one's watching." Daniel took a sip of wine, considering. "Okay. When I first moved to New York, I was so broke that I used to walk through Chelsea Market at lunchtime just to smell the food. I couldn't afford to buy anything, but I'd walk through and imagine what I'd order when I finally made it. It became this ritual. Every Friday I'd walk through and pick one thing I'd buy someday." Elena glanced at him, something stood in her expression. "Did you ever go back? After you could afford it?" "Yeah. About 6 months into working at Ashford and Associates, I bought the lobster roll I'd been dreaming about for 2 years. And it was good. Not life-changing, but good." Daniel smiled. The anticipation was better than the reality, which is probably a metaphor for something. For New York itself, maybe, or ambition in general. Elena plated their dinner, some kind of pasta with cream sauce, perfectly seared scallops on top. The basil she'd chopped scattered over everything. It looked like something from a restaurant. They ate at her dining table, which was smaller than the formal one Daniel glimpsed in another room, clearly the one she actually used. The food was incredible, and Daniel said so repeatedly until Elena laughed and told him to stop. "You sound surprised." "I am surprised. You're good at everything else. It seems unfair that you're good at this too." "I'm not good at everything." "Name one thing you're bad at." Elena was quiet for a moment, twirling pasta on her fork. "Relationships, apparently. Trusting people, letting my guard down, asking for help." She met his eyes. "Should I keep going?" "Those aren't things you're bad at. Those are things that are hard." "Same result." "Not really. Being bad at something means you lack the ability. These are things you've trained yourself not to do because the world punished you for them." Elena set down her fork, studying him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. "How did you get so perceptive?" "Grew up quiet. Learned to watch instead of talk. You see a lot when you're not busy performing." "Is that what I do? Perform? Isn't it what we all do?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You perform the untouchable CEO because it keeps people from seeing the parts of you that could get hurt. I perform the harmless creative because it keeps people from expecting too much. Kieran performs the cynic because optimism is scary. We're all just trying to protect ourselves." That's a bleak worldview. Or a realistic one. They finished dinner talking about everything and nothing: books they'd read, movies they loved, places they wanted to travel but never had time for. Elena told him about her mother, the literature professor who died too young and left Elena with a love of old films and an inability to watch anything sad. Daniel told her about his sister's wedding, how he'd been so focused on work he'd almost missed it, how that had been the moment he realized he was becoming someone he didn't like. The conversation flowed easier than it had any right to, punctuated by laughter and wine refills and the kind of comfortable silences that usually took months to build. Around 10, they moved to her living room. Elena built a fire in the fireplace while Daniel examined the photos on the mantel. One was face down. "Preston," Elena noticed where his attention had landed. "I keep meaning to throw it away, but I haven't gotten around to it." "Why not?" She settled onto the couch, tucking her feet under her. "Because part of me is still angry. And if I throw it away, I'm admitting he doesn't matter anymore. Which means admitting I wasted 3 years on someone who never deserved them. Which means admitting I was wrong, and I hate being wrong." Daniel sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "You weren't wrong. He was. There's a difference." "Is there?" Elena stared into the fire. "I'm supposed to be brilliant at reading people. It's literally my job understanding what motivates them, what they want, what they'll respond to. And I completely missed that the man I was going to marry was a narcissistic cheater who saw me as a trophy instead of a person. Love makes us blind. It's not a character flaw, it's human nature." "Love," Elena repeated the word bitterly. I'm not even sure it was love. Maybe it was just convenience. Compatible ambitions, good optics. He was handsome and successful, and everyone expected us to be together, so we were. Did you ever actually want to marry him? The question seemed to surprise her. She was quiet for a long time, firelight casting shadows across her face. I wanted to want to. I wanted to be the kind of woman who could have it all, the career, the relationship, the perfect life. But every time I imagined the wedding, all I could think about was how much work it would be. How many decisions I'd have to make, how many opinions I'd have to manage. It felt like another project to execute perfectly instead of something to be excited about. That should have been a sign. Yes, but I ignored it because admitting I didn't want to marry him meant admitting that maybe I didn't want marriage at all. And I'd already said yes, already announced it, already become half of a couple that everyone admired. Walking away would have meant disappointing people, causing gossip, looking unstable. She laughed hollowly. So I stayed right up until the moment I caught him with someone else. And the decision was made for me. Even then, part of me was relieved. Is that terrible? It's honest, which is rare and more valuable than terrible. Elena turned to look at him, and in the firelight she looked impossibly beautiful and impossibly sad. Why are you being so kind to me? I dragged you into my mess. You should hate me. I don't hate you. What do you feel then? It was the most dangerous question she could have asked. Daniel knew he should deflect, should keep things light and professional. But sitting there in her living room with the fire warm and the wine making him honest and Elena looking at him like his answer actually mattered, he couldn't lie. I feel like I'm finally seeing you. The real you, not the legend. And I like what I see. I like that you cook. I like that you can quote old movies. I like that you're angry at Preston instead of just sad because it means you know your worth. I like that you trusted me enough to let me help you even though trusting people is hard for you. He paused, knowing he should stop but unable to. And I feel like this arrangement we made is getting really complicated because I agreed to pretend to date you. But somewhere along the way I started to care, and I don't know if that's part of the performance or if it's real, and I think you don't know either. And that terrifies me. The silence that followed felt enormous. Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. Daniel waited for her to laugh it off, to retreat behind her professional facade, to end the evening and possibly his employment. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. It terrifies me too. Her whisper was barely audible over the fire's crackle. Her thumb traced circles on his palm, the gesture unconscious and intimate. Daniel's heart hammered so hard he was certain she could hear it. I haven't been honest. With you or myself, I told myself this was just practical, a solution to a problem. But that's not entirely true. Elena's voice shook slightly. The truth is, I like spending time with you. I like how you see me and aren't afraid of what you find. I like how you make me laugh. I like that you're here in my house, making my two big brownstone feel less empty. She looked up, meeting his eyes. And that's terrifying because this was supposed to be simple. Pretend for a few weeks, convince Preston I've moved on, end the arrangement, but nothing about this feels simple anymore. No, it doesn't. They sat there, hands linked, the fire crackling, the city humming beyond the windows. Daniel was acutely aware of every point of contact between them. Her fingers against his, her knee almost touching his, the scent of her perfume mixing with wood smoke. What do we do? Elena's question held genuine uncertainty, like she was asking him to navigate something she couldn't strategy her way through. I don't know. Maybe we just see where this goes. We keep preparing for the client dinner. We keep spending time together and we stop trying to label what this is. Let it be what it needs to be. That's not a plan, that's chaos. Maybe you need a little chaos. Elena laughed, the sound breaking the tension. I really don't. Chaos is my nightmare. Then maybe you need controlled chaos. Chaos with good intentions. Is that what you are? My controlled chaos, if you want me to be? Elena squeezed his hand, then released it, creating distance again. but this time it felt less like retreat and more like self-preservation. "It's late. You should probably go. The client dinner is tomorrow night. We both need to be sharp." Daniel stood, knowing she was right but not wanting to leave. "I'll see you at the restaurant, 7 p.m. 7 p.m. Elena walked him to the door and they stood in the entryway in a moment that felt suspended. Daniel wanted to kiss her, wanted to close the distance between them and find out if her lips tasted like wine and possibility if the spark he felt was one-sided or mutual. But rushing this, whatever this was, felt like the surest way to destroy it. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Daniel." He made it 3 steps down her brownstone stairs before she called his name. "Yeah. Thank you for dinner, for listening, for not making this weird. It is weird, but in a good way." Friday night was the client dinner and Daniel's nerves were wound so tight he could barely focus on work all day. He left the office at 6, went home to change into the expensive suit and arrived at the Ashford room at 6:55. Elena was already there, standing near the entrance in a dark emerald dress that was somehow both professional and stunning. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders. Diamond earrings caught the light. When she saw him, her face transformed, the cool, professional mask melting into something warm and genuine. "Hi." The word was soft, intimate. "Hi yourself." Daniel walked to her and Elena reached up to adjust his tie with familiar ease like she'd done it 100 times before. "Ready, as I'll ever be." They walked into the private dining room together and Daniel felt every eye turn toward them. The table was already half full. David Hutchkins from Strategy, Sarah Winters from Morrison Media, a few other executives Daniel recognized from company meetings. "Everyone, this is Daniel Brennan," Elena said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make the introduction significant. They sat side by side, close enough that their shoulders touched. Under the table, Elena found his hand and squeezed once. "You're doing fine." Dinner began. Wine was poured. Conversation flowed around topics Daniel could barely follow. Client retention strategies, market positioning, the politics of industry awards. Elena participated effortlessly, her brilliant mind on full display, while also making it clear through small gestures that Daniel mattered to her. A hand on his arm when she laughed, a glance seeking his opinion. Her body angled toward his even when speaking to others. Daniel played his part. He was attentive but not fawning. He asked intelligent questions when appropriate. He let Elena shine while making it clear through his gaze that he was captivated by her. And somewhere around the second course, Daniel realized he wasn't acting anymore. Then Preston Sterling walked into the restaurant. Daniel felt Elena go rigid beside him. Her hand, which had been resting on his knee under the table, suddenly gripped hard enough to hurt. Preston looked exactly like he had at the bar, tall, blonde, expensive suit, megawatt smile. But tonight he wasn't alone. The woman on his arm was different from Friday's conquest, younger if possible, wearing a dress that was more suggestion than fabric. Preston's eyes swept the room with predatory intent until they landed on Elena's table. His smile widened. He was walking toward them. "Elena." Daniel leaned close, his voice quiet. "Look at me." She turned her eyes wide with barely concealed panic. Daniel whispered, "You're brilliant. You're powerful. You're sitting here with people who respect you at a table you earned through talent and hard work. And he's just a man who never deserved you. So breathe and let me handle this." Something in Elena's expression shifted. The panic receded, replaced by surprise and then something fiercer. She nodded once. Preston reached their table just as Daniel placed his hand on Elena's cheek and leaned in to kiss her temple, a gesture of casual intimacy that said, "She's mine," without words. "Elena." Preston's voice was smooth as silk and twice as fake. "What a surprise." Elena turned and her composure was perfect, cool, professional, utterly unbothered. "Preston, I didn't know you'd be here. Neither did I until an hour ago. Last-minute invitation from the Morrison Media folks." He gestured to his date. "This is Amber. Amber, this is Elena Ashford, an old friend." "An ex," Elena corrected pleasantly. "Let's be accurate." Preston and I were engaged. It didn't work out. These things happen. Preston's smile tightened. Right. And you are. He looked at Daniel like he was an interesting insect. Daniel stood extending his hand with just enough confidence to be believable. Daniel Brennan. Nice to meet you. Daniel works at my company, Elena added, among other things. The way she said it, the small smile playing at her lips, suggested exactly what those other things were. Preston's handshake was aggressive, trying to assert dominance. Daniel held firm, refused to wince. How long has this been going on? Long enough, Elena said before Daniel could answer. She reached up, took Daniel's hand, pulled him gently back to his seat. We should let you get to your table, Preston. Enjoy your dinner. It was a dismissal, polite but absolute. Preston stood there for a moment too long, his date looking confused, clearly sensing tension she couldn't identify. Then he nodded once. Of course. Good to see you, Elena. You look well. I am well, Elena replied. Better than I've been in years, actually. Preston walked away, and Daniel felt Elena's whole body release tension. Under the table, her hand found his again, gripping tight. He squeezed back. A silent communication. You did it? The rest of the dinner passed more easily. Near the end of the meal, as dessert arrived and coffee was poured, Sarah Winters leaned across the table toward Elena. I have to say, Elena, I've never seen you look happier. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Elena glanced at Daniel, and the expression on her face made his chest ache because for just a second she looked at him like this was real, like he was actually the reason for her happiness. Thank you, Sarah, Elena said softly. I think I finally figured out what I was missing. The evening ended around 10. Goodbyes were exchanged, business cards handed out, promises made for future meetings. Preston had left earlier pointedly without saying goodbye. Elena and Daniel walked out of the restaurant together, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. Outside, the November night was clear and cold. Manhattan sparkled around them, all lights and possibility. Elena stopped on the sidewalk once they were alone, turning to face him fully. In the streetlight, she looked younger, freer, like a weight had been lifted. You were perfect, absolutely perfect. The kiss on the temple when Preston walked up, inspired. Seemed like the right move. It was. Did you see his face when I said I was better than I've been in years? Daniel had. Pretty sure he wanted to throw his wine glass. Good. Elena laughed, a sound of pure relief and exhilaration. Then quieter. Thank you. For tonight. For all of it. For making me feel like maybe I can actually get through this. You are always going to get through this. You're the strongest person I know. That's because you don't really know me. I'm starting to. They stood there in the cold, and something passed between them, recognition, understanding. The acknowledgement that the lines between fake and real were starting to blur in ways neither had anticipated. I should go. Elena's words contradicted her stillness. Early meeting tomorrow. Right, of course. The car can take you home first. I can grab the subway. It's not far. Daniel. Yeah. Elena hesitated, her fingers still resting on his arm. This arrangement, it's working better than I expected. But we should be careful about boundaries, about what's real and what's performance. Daniel's heart sank even as he knew she was right. Understood. I just don't want either of us to get confused or hurt. We won't. The confidence in his voice didn't match what he felt. Elena nodded, stepped back, creating distance. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Elena. He watched her walk to the waiting car, watched her climb inside without looking back. The vehicle pulled away, taillights disappearing into Manhattan traffic. Daniel stood alone on the sidewalk, his expensive suit feeling like a costume, the taste of that brief temple kiss still warm on his lips. They'd pulled it off. They'd convinced everyone, including Daniel, suspected Preston, that they were a real couple. The plan was working. So why did he feel like he'd just lost something he'd never actually had? The next week passed in a blur. Elena had insisted they maintain distance to avoid suspicion. No more brownstone dinners, no extended conversations at work. Just the occasional text about the upcoming charity gala on Saturday. But Saturday morning, Elena called him. Change of plans. I need you to come to my place tonight, 7 p.m. We need to practice for the gala. Practice what? Dancing. There will be dancing at the gala, Daniel. Formal dancing. And if we're going to sell this, we need to look like we've danced together before. So Saturday evening found Daniel standing in Elena's living room while she pulled up a playlist of jazz standards on her phone. She'd changed into something more casual, black pants and a silk blouse, but still looked impossibly elegant. Have you ever waltzed before? My mom made me take lessons in high school. I hated it then. And now I'm grateful, because I get to hold you. The honesty in his words made Elena pause, something flickering across her face. Then she stepped into his arms, one hand on his shoulder, the other in his. They moved through her living room in a slow waltz, and Daniel was acutely aware of every point of contact, her hand in his, her body close to his, the scent of her perfume. You're a good dancer, Elena murmured. You make it easy. They practiced for an hour, moving through various dances, adjusting their positioning, learning the rhythm of each other's movements. And with each dance, the space between them grew smaller, the awareness more intense. Finally, Elena pulled up a slower song, Billie Holiday, achingly romantic. One more, to make sure we can handle the slow dances. Daniel pulled her close, closer than they'd been all evening. Elena's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. They swayed to the music, barely moving, just existing in each other's space. Daniel! Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, this thing between us. It's not fake anymore. You know that, right? Daniel's heart stopped. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. In the soft light of her living room, she looked vulnerable and beautiful and terrified. I know. So what do we do about it? I don't know. I don't, Elena. There are so many complications. The company, the age difference, what people will say. I don't care what people say. You should. You have a career to protect. So do you. But you took a chance on this arrangement. Take a chance on this being real. Elena closed her eyes, and Daniel watched emotions play across her face: fear, hope, desire, resignation. When she opened them again, there were tears threatening to spill. What if we try and it falls apart? What if I hurt you? What if you realize I'm exactly what Preston said? Too focused on work, too cold, too damaged. You're not damaged. You're careful. There's a difference. Daniel pulled her closer, their bodies flush now, still swaying to music that felt like it was playing just for them. And if it falls apart, at least we tried. At least we were brave enough to take the risk. I'm not brave. You're the bravest person I know. Elena laughed, but it came out choked. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you cook when you're stressed. I know you quote old movies when you think no one's paying attention. I know you're terrified of being vulnerable, but you let me in anyway. I know you're brilliant and fierce and kind, even when you pretend not to be. Daniel paused, then finished quietly. And I know I'm falling for you. And I think you're falling for me too. And that terrifies both of us, but maybe that's okay. Maybe being terrified means it matters. The song was ending. The playlist had stopped. But Elena and Daniel stood still in the middle of her living room, locked in their own world. Come to the cabin with me tomorrow, after the gala, just for the day. I need to be somewhere private to figure this out, somewhere real. Okay. Elena leaned up, and for a breathless moment, Daniel thought she was going to kiss him. Instead, she rested her forehead against his. I think I'm falling for you too. The gala was everything Elena had promised: spectacular and exhausting. Daniel wore his tuxedo, Elena wore crimson, and they moved through the evening like a real couple. They danced, they mingled, they weathered Preston's attempt at confrontation with united front. And when it was over, they drove north to the Catskills in the pre-dawn darkness, neither speaking, both knowing something had shifted between them that couldn't be undone. Sunday at the cabin was quiet, peaceful. They talked about everything and nothing. They made breakfast together, they sat by the lake and watched the water. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elena turned to Daniel. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, terrifying and perfect. "I love you too." They kissed there by the lake, and it wasn't for show, wasn't for Preston, wasn't fake at all. It was real and deep and full of promise and fear in equal measure. "We need to tell HR," Elena said when they finally pulled apart. "Make this official. I can't keep lying about us." "Agreed." Monday morning. They drove back to the city that night, hands linked, hearts full, ready to face whatever came next. Monday morning, Daniel arrived at work at 7:30. At 7:43, Kieran appeared at his desk, laptop in hand. Face grim. "We need to talk, now." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" Kieran didn't answer, just opened his laptop and turned it toward Daniel. An email, sent to the entire board of directors at 6:47 that morning. Subject line: undisclosed relationship, ethics violation, CEO Elena Ashford. Anonymous sender. Attached were professional photographs. Daniel and Elena dancing at the gala, bodies close, faces intimate. Daniel and Elena kissing outside the plaza, the image time-stamped and dated. Daniel and Elena holding hands, walking together, looking at each other like nothing else existed. The email text was clinical, damning. CEO Elena Ashford has been conducting an undisclosed romantic relationship with subordinate employee Daniel Brennan for approximately 8 weeks. This constitutes a violation of company ethics policy and potential abuse of power. Immediate investigation required. Daniel's world imploded. This was planned. Someone had hired a professional photographer. Someone had documented them deliberately. Someone had sent this email exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes before their scheduled HR appointment, preventing them from voluntary disclosure, making it look like they were hiding it, transforming their relationship into a scandal. Preston's revenge perfectly executed. "Daniel," Kieran's voice was gentle, cutting through the roaring in his ears. "Everyone knows. The email went to the board, but it leaked to the company within an hour. HR just sent out a summons for both you and Elena, 10 a.m. emergency meeting." Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything they'd built, everything they'd planned, destroyed in a single email. His phone buzzed. "Elena, don't come to my office, don't react. Conference room B945. We face this together." Even in crisis, she was thinking strategically. Even ambushed, she was planning their defense. Daniel stood on shaking legs. He had an hour and 2 minutes before they faced the board. An hour and 2 minutes before their relationship became public knowledge, under the worst possible circumstances. An hour and 2 minutes before everything changed forever. Conference room B felt smaller than it should, the walls pressing in like the office itself was holding its breath. Elena was already there when Daniel arrived at 9:45, standing at the window with her back to the door. Battle mode had descended, charcoal suit sharp as a blade, hair pulled back with military precision, heels that could serve as weapons. But her hands betrayed her, clenched, white-knuckled at her sides. She turned when the door clicked shut. For one unguarded second, her facade crumbled completely. "Are you okay?" The question from her, not him, twisted something in Daniel's chest. "Are you Elena? This is your company, your reputation. I don't care about that right now. I care about you." The words hung between them, too honest for the fluorescent lighting and corporate furniture. Daniel crossed the room, pulled her into his arms before either could second-guess it. Elena melted against him, trembling. "They're going to crucify us." Her whisper was muffled against his shoulder. "They're going to try, but you didn't build this company from nothing by surrendering when threatened." Elena pulled back, and Daniel watched her reassemble herself piece by piece, the CEO emerging from the frightened woman like armor materializing from air. The photos are professional quality. Someone hired a private investigator, Preston certainly, though, proving it will be nearly impossible. She moved to the table, pulled out her laptop. It is trying to trace the email, but it's been routed through multiple servers in 3 countries. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. What are they going to ask us in the meeting? Elena's fingers stilled on the keyboard. When it started, whether it's consensual, whether I've shown you preferential treatment promotions, raises, special assignments, whether you felt pressured or coerced at any point, whether this relationship constitutes an abuse of power. None of that happened. The perception is what matters. And the perception right now is that the CEO has been conducting a secret relationship with a subordinate employee 12 years her junior. The optics are catastrophic. Daniel sat across from her. We tell them the truth, all of it. The bar, Preston's harassment, our arrangement, how it became real. We were coming to HR this morning. We have proof of that appointment. The truth makes me look desperate and unstable. It makes you look naive or opportunistic. Then that's how we look. But we won't lie to protect our pride. Elena studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. You're right. Full transparency is our only play. She glanced at her watch. 15 minutes. Are you ready for this? No, but I'm ready to fight for us. The boardroom on the executive floor was designed to intimidate all glass and chrome and the kind of furniture that cost more than cars. 5 board members sat in judgment along one side of the conference table. Linda Morrison from HR occupied one end, a thick folder of documents before her. A company lawyer Daniel didn't recognize held down the other end. Robert Blackwell sat front and center, arms crossed, expression broadcasting skepticism. He was 56, former CEO of a competitor, retired but still wielding influence. Conservative to his bones, he believed in rules and hierarchies and the way things had always been done. Beside him, Sarah Winters looked sympathetic but guarded. She was 52, self-made, had fought her own battles in this industry. Daniel hoped she'd understand. The other 3 board members, 2 men and 1 woman, wore neutral expressions that gave nothing away. Elena took her seat with the posture of someone walking to the guillotine with dignity intact. Daniel sat beside her, acutely aware that every person in this room held their future in their hands. Linda Morrison opened the folder. Thank you both for meeting on such short notice. I'm sure you're aware of the email that was distributed to the board this morning. We are. Elena's voice was steady as bedrock. The board has asked me to conduct a preliminary inquiry into the allegations. I want to be clear, this is not a formal investigation at this stage. We're trying to understand the facts. Linda's eyes were kind but firm. Ms. Ashford, can you confirm that you are in a romantic relationship with Mr. Brennan? Yes. And when did this relationship begin? Elena took a breath and Daniel felt the moment crystallize. This was it, full truth or careful evasion. She chose truth. The full answer is complicated and in some ways unflattering to me. But I'm going to tell you anyway because transparency is more important than my pride. She proceeded to lay out everything. The bar, Preston's systematic harassment over 6 months, her panic attack seeing him that Friday night, asking Daniel for help, emphasizing repeatedly that Daniel had every right to refuse, that he'd volunteered, that there was no coercion. She explained how they'd prepared for public events where Preston would be present, how feelings had developed gradually, naturally, unexpectedly, how they'd made the decision last weekend to make the relationship real, how they'd scheduled the HR appointment for this morning, pulling up her calendar as proof showing the booking made 6 days prior. We were coming to you voluntarily. We wanted to disclose properly, request Daniel's transfer to eliminate any reporting conflict. We intended to do everything by the book. Elena's jaw tightened. And then someone sent that email at 6:47 this morning, exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes before our scheduled appointment. Someone wanted to prevent us from disclosing on our own terms. Robert Blackwell leaned forward, his expression hard. Ms. Ashford, are you seriously admitting that you initiated a relationship with a subordinate employee through what amounts to deception and manipulation? I'm admitting I made a mistake in how I initially approached Mr. Brennan. I was in a moment of crisis and made a poor decision. I apologized to him immediately, offered him multiple opportunities to withdraw without consequences, and eventually he chose to help me of his own volition. What developed from there was genuine and mutual. A genuine relationship that you kept secret for nearly 2 months. We kept our arrangement secret for 3 weeks while we figured out what it was. We've been in an actual romantic relationship for less than a week, and we were hours away from making it official through proper channels, when this email sabotaged that process. Blackwell's expression suggested he wasn't buying it. The damage is done, Ms. Ashford. This email went to the entire board. It's already leaked to the company. Clients are calling. Competitors are talking. The optics are disastrous. CEO dating subordinate, significant age gap, secret relationship. It's exactly the kind of scandal this company doesn't need. With respect, Robert, the only scandal here is that someone felt the need to weaponize a consensual adult relationship for their own purposes. Elena's voice had gone cold and precise, the ice returning. Daniel and I are both single. We're both adults. We developed feelings for each other and we're handling the disclosure appropriately. The fact that someone chose to make it public in the most damaging way possible says more about them than it does about us. Linda Morrison turned to Daniel. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you directly, did you ever feel pressured or coerced into this relationship? Daniel met her eyes without flinching. No. Ms. Ashford made it clear from the very beginning that I could refuse, that I could back out at any time. I chose to help because I saw someone I respect in genuine distress. I chose to continue because I developed real feelings. Did Ms. Ashford show you any preferential treatment during your relationship? Promotions, raises, special assignments? No. If anything, she was harder on me professionally. She rejected 3 of my campaign pitches in the month before we started this arrangement. She maintained complete professional separation at work. Nevertheless, the power imbalance is concerning. She's your CEO. You're a junior employee. There's inherent pressure in that dynamic. Daniel felt heat rising in his chest. There's also inherent pressure in being a woman CEO who's expected to have no personal life, to be perfect and untouchable and never make a mistake. When Marcus Colleen from accounting married his former employee 3 years ago, this board didn't say anything. When David Hartford dated his executive assistant, there was no investigation. But Elena dates someone and suddenly it's a scandal requiring emergency meetings. The room went silent. Linda Morrison looked uncomfortable. Sarah Winters nodded almost imperceptibly, a small smile tugging at her lips. Robert Blackwell's face darkened. Mr. Brennan, you're out of line. We're trying to determine if there's been an ethics violation, and I'm pointing out that you're applying different standards based on gender. Elena has given 20 years to this company. She's grown revenue by 40% in 5 years. She's brought in major clients, built an incredible team, earned this company's reputation for excellence. Her personal life doesn't diminish any of that. Unless you think women in leadership positions should be held to different standards than men. Sarah Winters spoke up for the first time, her voice firm. He has a point, Robert. We do need to be careful about applying policies consistently. Marcus Colleen is still happily married to his former employee and working here without any issues. David Hartford's relationship with his assistant was never investigated. Elena has been an exemplary CEO. One relationship which she was about to disclose voluntarily shouldn't overshadow years of excellent leadership. Properly disclosed. Blackwell's voice dripped skepticism. They kept it secret for weeks. They kept it private for 3 weeks while making a decision about their relationship, Sarah corrected. That's not the same as hiding an ethics violation, and they were literally hours away from voluntary disclosure when someone and I think we all have suspicions about who decided to weaponize it. The question we should be asking is who benefits from destroying Elena's reputation, not whether she's committed a fireable offense. The board members began arguing among themselves. Daniel watched Elena sit perfectly still, her professional fate being debated like a quarterly earnings report. Her hands were folded on the table, but he could see the white of her knuckles, the tension in her shoulders. Linda Morrison finally raised her hand for silence. I think we need to vote on whether this constitutes a violation serious enough to warrant disciplinary action. The question before us: does Ms. Ashford's relationship with Mr. Brennan violate company policy in a manner requiring formal discipline? The vote took less than a minute. Blackwell and one other board member, a man Daniel didn't know well, voted yes. Sarah Winters and two others voted no. 3-2 against disciplinary action. Daniel felt relief flood through him so intensely his hands shook under the table. However, Linda continued, there are conditions. Effective immediately, Mr. Sims. Brennan will transfer to the strategy department under David Hutchkins's supervision, completely removing any reporting relationship to Ms. Ashford. Both of you will sign formal relationship disclosure agreements. You'll be subject to additional oversight for the next 6 months to ensure no favoritism or inappropriate conduct. And we'll issue a public statement acknowledging the relationship and the steps taken to address any conflicts of interest. Elena nodded, her composure perfect. We'll sign whatever you need. Thank you for your consideration. There's also the matter of public perception, Linda said gently. This email has already leaked beyond the board. The story is spreading through the industry. You should both be prepared for questions, speculation, and judgment from colleagues, clients, and competitors. We understand. Robert Blackwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For the record, I think this sets a dangerous precedent, but the vote has been cast. He walked out without another word, the door closing behind him with finality. The other board members filed out more slowly. Sarah Winters paused by Elena's chair, squeezed her shoulder briefly. For what it's worth, I think you handled this with grace, and I hope you're happy. Thank you, Sarah, Elena said quietly. That means more than you know. When they were finally alone with just Linda Morrison, the HR director's professional mask softened slightly. That took courage, being that honest. Most people would have tried to minimize or spin it. Elena's hands were shaking now that it was over. Lying would have only made it worse. You'll need to actually transfer, Mr. Brennan. Not just on paper. David will have real work for you, real projects. It has to be genuine. I understand. And for the next 6 months, you'll both need to be beyond reproach. Any hint of favoritism, any perception of impropriety, and Blackwell will push for a full investigation. He's looking for reasons to prove he was right. They signed the paperwork in Linda's office: disclosure forms, transfer agreements, acknowledgement of policies. Daniel's hand cramped from signing his name so many times. When they finally walked out, it was nearly noon. They'd been in meetings for over 2 hours, and Daniel felt like he'd aged a decade. The executive hallway was mercifully empty. Elena stopped outside her office, turned to face him. The professional facade was gone now, replaced by exhaustion so profound it made her look fragile. I almost lost everything, her voice barely carried. My company, you, all of it. Daniel pulled her into his arms, not caring who might see. But you didn't. We survived. Barely, and only because the vote went our way by one person. But it did, and now we can stop hiding. Elena pulled back, looked at him with eyes that held too much fear. Daniel, we just became public knowledge under the worst possible circumstances. Everyone in this industry now knows about us. The speculation, the judgment, the assumptions about my motives and yours. It's going to be brutal. Then we face it together. I can't be here right now. Can't face the stares and the whispers. Her voice cracked. I need. Okay. Let's go. They left through the parking garage, Elena's car waiting in her reserved spot. She drove north without saying where they were going, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Daniel didn't ask, just sat beside her and let the city fall away behind them. 2 hours later, they pulled up to the cabin in the Catskills. The place Elena had bought with Preston years ago and then abandoned after discovering his betrayals. Dust-covered furniture, photos, face-down time frozen at the moment of her heartbreak. I came here after I found out about Preston's affairs. Elena's voice was hollow as they stood in the doorway. Cried for 2 days straight, then locked it up and swore I'd never come back. Why bring me here? She turned, and the vulnerability in her expression made Daniel's chest ache. Because this is the only place I've ever been able to fall apart. The only place where I don't have to be the CEO or maintain any facade. I'm just me. And I wanted you to see that. The me that falls apart. As if on cue, Elena's composure shattered. She sank onto the dust-covered couch and broke great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Years of suppressed emotion pouring out like a dam breaking. Daniel sat beside her, pulled her close, let her cry herself empty against his shoulder. "I was so scared," she gasped between sobs. "Thought I'd lose you and the company in the same week. Everything I'd built would crumble because I was stupid enough to fall in love. You didn't lose anything. We're here. We're together. But what if the vote had gone differently? What if one more board member had sided with Blackwell? They didn't. And you know why, because you've spent 20 years proving you're the best. One relationship doesn't erase that." Elena's tears slowly subsided. They sat in the dusty cabin as afternoon faded toward evening, holding each other, processing what they'd survived. "How do we do this?" Elena's question was muffled against his shoulder. "Build a relationship when the whole world is waiting for us to fail. By not caring what the world thinks. By being honest with each other, by fighting for each other." Elena pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said before, but I was too scared." Daniel waited, heart hammering. "I love you. I've been too afraid to say it out loud. Too afraid that admitting it would make it real, and real things can destroy you. But sitting in that boardroom watching my life being decided by other people, all I could think was that if I lost you, nothing else mattered. Not the company, not my reputation, none of it. You matter more." The words unlocked something in Daniel's chest. "I love you too. I've loved you since you grabbed my hand in that bar and trusted me with your fear. I've loved you through every dinner and every dance and every moment you let me see the real you." They kissed there in the cabin, surrounded by ghosts of Elena's past, and it felt like exorcism, like she was finally letting go of what Preston had done to her and choosing something new, something real, something worth fighting for. They spent the weekend at the cabin talking and planning and simply being together without the pressure of the city. Sunday evening, driving back to Brooklyn, Elena reached across the console and took Daniel's hand. "Whatever comes next, we face it as a team. Always." Monday morning brought the reality they'd been dreading. Daniel arrived at Ashford and Associates to find the entire office buzzing with speculation. Whispers followed him through the creative department as he collected his personal items. Colleagues he'd worked with for 3 years suddenly found reasons to look away when he passed. The strategy team welcomed him with varying degrees of warmth, some genuinely friendly, others coldly professional, a few openly hostile. "Sleeping your way to a promotion, Brennan." The comment came from a strategist named Patterson, loud enough for half the floor to hear. David Hutchkins shut it down immediately. "That's enough. Daniel transferred here through proper channels approved by HR and the board. He'll be treated with the same respect as everyone else on this team. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." But the damage was done. Daniel could feel the judgment, the assumptions, the whispers about his competence and his motives. People who'd barely noticed him before now scrutinized his every move, looking for evidence that he didn't deserve to be here. He focused on the work. David gave him complex strategy proposals for major clients, market analysis, competitive positioning studies. The work was challenging, demanding, completely different from creative. But Daniel threw himself into it, determined to prove he'd earned this position through skill, not through sleeping with the CEO. Elena faced her own gauntlet. Clients called with pointed questions about leadership and judgment. Competitors spread rumors about instability and impropriety. Industry blogs ran thinly veiled articles about CEOs who mixed business with pleasure. The comment sections were vicious, filled with speculation about her motives, her character, her fitness to lead. She faced every meeting, every call, every skeptical question with the same steel spine she'd always had. Refused to apologize for being happy, refused to let Preston's revenge define her. But it wore on both of them. Late-night phone calls where Elena's voice cracked with exhaustion. Stolen lunches where Daniel looked hollowed out from the constant judgment. They were together, yes. They'd survived the board meeting, but the cost was higher than either had anticipated. 3 weeks after the email scandal, Daniel received a news alert on his phone during a strategy meeting. His blood went cold as he read the headline. Breaking anonymous leak reveals alleged coercion in Ashford CEO relationship. He excused himself from the meeting, stepped into an empty conference room, and clicked through to find fabricated emails. Sophisticated forgeries designed to look like correspondence between him and Elena. Elena to Daniel. Meet me tonight or there will be consequences for your career. Daniel to Elena. I don't think this is appropriate. Elena. I decide what's appropriate. I'm your boss. Don't forget that. The metadata looked authentic. The timestamps matched their actual timeline. The email addresses were correct. If you didn't know they were fake, they'd be absolutely damning. Daniel's hands shook as he called Elena. Have you seen it? I'm looking at it now. Her voice was hollow, defeated in a way he'd never heard before. Someone sent it to the Wall Street Journal. They're running a story tomorrow morning. These are complete fabrications, total lies. I know that, you know that. But it is analyzing them now and the damage is already done. Public perception doesn't wait for fact-checking or digital forensics. Within hours, the story exploded across social media and news outlets. Headlines screamed about abuse of power. Think pieces debated whether Elena should step down. Talking heads on business networks discussed the implications for corporate governance. Daniel's name was dragged through the mud as either a victim or an opportunist, depending on the source. By Wednesday afternoon, Robert Blackwell was publicly calling for Elena's resignation in an interview with Bloomberg. Daniel sat in his new office watching his phone light up with notifications, each one worse than the last. His LinkedIn was flooded with messages from recruiters asking if he was looking for new opportunities, industry code for, "We assume you're about to be fired." Former colleagues from other companies sent sympathetic messages that felt more like condolences. His phone rang. Elena. It traced the emails to an IP address associated with Preston's venture capital firm. It's not definitive proof he did it personally, but it's strong circumstantial evidence. Can we use that? His company's launching an internal investigation. Claims someone may have used their network without authorization. But it could take weeks to get results. And in the meantime, the board is applying pressure. Blackwell wants me to take a temporary leave of absence for the good of the company. That's insane. That's politics. Elena's voice cracked and Daniel heard the breaking point approaching. I'm losing this, Daniel. I can feel it slipping away. Everything I built, everything I worked for. No, you're not. We fight back. How Preston's done this perfectly. The emails look real. The narrative is compelling. He's destroyed my credibility without leaving definitive fingerprints. Daniel paced his office, thinking furiously. Then an idea crystallized, dangerous and desperate, but possibly their only play. What if I go public, tell the whole story myself unfiltered? Your side, our side, the complete truth, the bar, Preston's harassment, how this really started, how our feelings developed. Take away his power by being completely transparent before he can spin it further. Daniel, that's career suicide. If you go public and people don't believe you, you'll never work in this industry again. You'll be labeled as either delusional or complicit. But if I don't, they'll keep assuming the worst. At least this way we control the narrative. We get ahead of it. Elena was quiet for a long time. If you do this, there's no taking it back. Every word you say will be analyzed, dissected, weaponized. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. I'm not going to let him destroy you, not when the truth is on our side. Thursday afternoon, Daniel held an impromptu press conference in a rented conference room downtown. No publicist, no corporate lawyers, no prepared statement. Just him and a handful of reporters who'd been covering the scandal with increasing breathlessness. He told them everything. How he'd met Elena at the bar, terrified and fleeing Preston's systematic harassment. How she'd asked, not demanded, for help. how they'd made an arrangement to help her navigate social situations where Preston would be present to take away his power to humiliate her publicly, how real feelings had developed over weeks of genuine connection, how they'd been hours from voluntarily disclosing to HR when the anonymous email went out deliberately timed to prevent proper disclosure and maximize damage. He talked about Preston's 6-month campaign of psychological warfare against Elena, showing up everywhere she went with progressively younger women, making sure she saw him, making sure she felt humiliated and small. He talked about the double standard that allowed male executives to date subordinates without scrutiny, while Elena faced calls for resignation. "I'm here voluntarily. I love Elena Ashford. No one coerced me, manipulated me, or threatened me. These fabricated emails are lies designed to destroy her reputation because Preston Sterling can't handle that she's moved on and found happiness. And whoever is helping him, I'm asking you to look at the facts. Look at her 20 years of exemplary leadership. Look at the timing of these leaks. Look at who benefits from her downfall. And then ask yourself if you're reporting the truth or helping someone's vendetta." The press conference lasted 45 minutes. Daniel answered every question, no matter how hostile or invasive. When it was over, he had no idea if it would help or just make everything infinitely worse. He called Elena from the lobby of the building. "It's done. I said everything. I watched the live stream." Her voice was thick with emotion, tears barely held back. "You were incredible, brave and honest, and everything I don't deserve. You deserve all of it, and more." The reaction was swift and polarized. Some outlets praised his honesty and called for investigation into the fabricated emails. Others remained skeptical, suggesting it was a coordinated PR strategy. But then something shifted the narrative in a way neither Elena nor Daniel could have predicted. Women started coming forward, Preston's former colleagues, women he'd dated, people he'd worked with over the years. One by one, they told their stories about his manipulation, his narcissism, his pattern of targeting successful women and systematically undermining them when they didn't behave exactly as he wanted. A former VP at a company Preston had invested in, a woman named Victoria Chen, did a detailed interview with the New York Times about how Preston had sabotaged her career after she rejected his advances. She provided emails, text messages, testimony from witnesses. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Other women shared similar stories. A pattern emerged of Preston using his wealth and connections to punish women who dared to be successful without deferring to him, who chose their careers over his ego, who moved on after he betrayed them. Within a week, Preston's firm put him on indefinite leave pending investigation. His carefully cultivated reputation, the charming venture capitalist, the eligible bachelor, the successful businessman, crumbled in days. It confirmed the fabricated emails originated from Preston's firm's network. While they couldn't prove he'd personally sent them, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The Wall Street Journal ran a retraction and apology. Other outlets followed suit. The board issued a formal statement clearing Elena of any wrongdoing and condemning the coordinated campaign of harassment and defamation against her. Robert Blackwell, embarrassed by his rush to judgment and facing criticism for his double standards, quietly resigned from his board position. Elena kept her position as CEO. The stock, which had dipped during the scandal, recovered fully. Clients who'd expressed concerns called to apologize and renew their contracts. They'd survived, barely bruised, battered by the experience, but together. 6 months later, December arrived with the kind of cold that made you appreciate heated buildings. The annual Ashford and Associates holiday party filled the office with music and laughter, and the loosened ties that came with open bars and year-end relief. Daniel arrived with Elena on his arm openly now, no more hiding, no more pretending. The office had adjusted to their relationship over the months. Most colleagues had moved on to fresher gossip. The initial scandal had faded into background noise, just another piece of company history. David Hutchkins pulled Daniel aside near the bar, a genuine smile on his face. "That strategy proposal you submitted for the Morrison Media account, brilliant work. Insightful, thorough, exactly what they needed. I'm recommending you for senior strategist effective January 1st. Thank you. Daniel meant it. He'd found unexpected passion in this department, discovered skills he hadn't known he possessed. The forced transfer had become a genuine opportunity. He found Elena across the room watching him with undisguised pride. She'd relaxed over these months, smiled more easily, laughed more freely. The constant vigilance had softened into something more sustainable, more human. They'd established rituals that grounded them. Every other weekend at the Catskills cabin, now cleansed of Preston's ghost and filled with their own memories. Sunday morning coffee at her brownstone, reading the paper together in comfortable slants. Quiet weeknight dinners where they talked about their days, their dreams, their future. The party wound down around midnight. Walking to the car, Elena took Daniel's hand. A simple gesture that still sent warmth through him every time. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lose everything, she said quietly. My company, my reputation, you. But you didn't. No, I didn't. And you know what I learned? She stopped, turned to face him under a streetlight, snowflakes beginning to fall around them. The things I was so afraid of losing, the perfect reputation, the untouchable image, they weren't what mattered. What mattered was having someone who saw me at my worst and didn't run, who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You would have done the same for me. I hope so. I hope I'm becoming someone brave enough to do that. February arrived, and Elena suggested going back to where it all began, the Crown and Anchor, the bar where Daniel had first seen her, terrified and desperate. The place looked the same. Same Friday night crowd. Same overpriced bourbon. Same noise and ambition packed into too small a space. But Daniel and Elena weren't the same people who'd stood here 9 months ago. They sat at the bar at the exact spot where Elena had grabbed his hand and begged for help, where Daniel had made the split-second decision that changed both their lives. I was so scared that night, Elena said, staring at her drink. Thought my world was ending. In a way it was, your old world. It needed to end so you could build a new one. Elena reached into her bag, pulled out a small velvet box. Daniel's heart stopped. It's not a proposal, she said quickly, seeing his expression. Not yet, but it's a promise. Inside were 2 matching rings, simple white gold bands, elegant and understated. A promise of what? Elena's hands shook slightly as she spoke. That I'm all in. That this isn't temporary or convenient or something I'll walk away from when it gets hard. That I can imagine forever with you. If you want that. Daniel took one of the rings, studied it in the bar's dim lighting. It fit perfectly when he slipped it on, like it had been made for him, which, knowing Elena, it probably had been. I've been imagining forever with you since that client dinner. When you defended me to Preston, when you looked at me like I mattered more than anything else in the room. Elena put on her matching ring. They held up their hands, the bands catching light, a promise to each other that needed no witnesses or official declarations. Take me home. The words echoed that first desperate night, but stripped of all fear and panic. Just love and choice and the certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Always. 1 year after that Friday night in November, Daniel stood in the Catskills cabin with cherry blossoms blooming outside despite the late spring cold and the lake sparkling in afternoon sunshine. Elena stood across from him in a simple white dress, her father beside her, looking older but proud. His own parents had flown in from Toledo, his mother crying happy tears throughout the entire ceremony. Kieran Sullivan served as best man, still slightly bewildered by how his roommate's life had transformed, but genuinely thrilled. Sarah Winters attended, having become a friend and mentor to them both. A handful of other close friends and family filled the small ceremony. No press, no industry colleagues, no performance. Just love. The officiant, a judge who was a friend of Elena's father, asked Daniel if he took Elena as his wife. He thought about that night in the bar, about her trembling hand in his, about every moment since that had led them here, the fear and the scandal and the fighting and the victory. About choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. I do. Elena's vows were shorter than her usual presentations, but infinitely more powerful. I spent 20 years building walls to protect myself. You taught me that the bravest thing isn't staying safe, it's letting someone in. I love you. I choose you. I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life." They exchanged wedding bands, different ones now, but worn alongside the promise rings they'd never taken off. Kissed while their friends and family applauded, signed papers that made it legal and binding and real. The reception was small and perfect. They danced to jazz standards on the cabin's small deck. Cut a cake that Elena had insisted on making herself despite Daniel's protests. Laughed and talked and celebrated with the people who mattered most. As evening fell and guests began filtering back to their hotels, Daniel and Elena stood at the lake's edge watching the sun set over water that reflected gold and pink and orange. "Best decision I ever made." Elena set her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. "What, marrying me? No. Trusting you that night. Choosing to be brave instead of safe. I'm glad you did. Me too." They stood there as stars began appearing overhead. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something that mattered. Not because it was easy or convenient or made sense on paper, but because sometimes the best things in life require risking everything. Daniel had been invisible once, a junior creative lost in a massive company, overlooked and underestimated. Elena had been untouchable, a CEO so protected by reputation and walls that no one saw the lonely woman underneath. Together they'd found visibility and vulnerability. They'd found love in the wreckage of fear and scandal. They'd proved that sometimes the man who seems to have nothing to offer can give a woman everything she needs: the courage to be seen, to be human, to be imperfect and still worthy of love. And sometimes the woman who seems to have everything can teach a man what he's truly worth, not his job title or his salary or his professional achievements, but his heart, his honesty, his willingness to stand beside her when the whole world was watching and judging. The cabin lights glowed warm behind them, promising shelter and warmth and home. Inside, Kieran was probably telling embarrassing stories about Daniel's early days in New York. Elena's father was likely debating something with Sarah Winters. The people they loved were laughing and celebrating their happiness. But Daniel and Elena stayed by the lake a little longer, holding each other, grateful for every difficult moment that had led them here. Because they'd learned the most important truth. Love isn't about avoiding pain or protecting yourself from risk. Love is about finding someone worth being brave for. Someone who makes you want to tear down your walls and let them see everything, even the parts you've spent years hiding. Someone who looks at you when you're falling apart and says, "I've got you." Someone who turns a moment of desperation in a Manhattan bar into a lifetime of chosen courage. And that was worth everything.